Welcome to Marketing on Purpose. I'm your host, Michael Fennick, partner at RDB. Today on the podcast, we're joined by Ted Rubin. Ted is a leading social marketing strategist, author, speaker, and provocateur. He's currently CMO of Photify. Ted is the most followed CMO on Twitter, according to Social Media Marketing Magazine, and was named one of Forbes' top 50 social media power influencers. In our conversation today, we discuss social media marketing from a CMO's perspective, the difference between managers and leaders, and how the world is changing as a result of COVID-19. We're also joined by international marketing executive Karen O'Brien. Now, let's get to the conversation with Ted. Ted, give me 30 seconds on your background, your work as a CMO, your experiences with Seth Godin, collective bias, etc. Give me 30 seconds on you.
I got involved in digital when it was just starting back in 1997. I joined Seth Godin, was lucky enough to be there with him when he coined the term permission marketing, viral, when he started talking about idea viruses. I moved on from there to through a bunch of different things, but ended up at Elf Cosmetics, which is where I got my initial experience in social media. Grew their brand using social media with zero marketing budget. They're $1 billion company now. Went from there to Open Sky and peer-to-peer commerce, and then into content marketing, which I kind of did all along, but into the straight content marketing space with collective bias and now Photify.
Tell me about your experience as a CMO, experiencing social media and what the ramifications are for a CMO. What do you need to think about as a CMO?
Well, look, I just think it's a whole different world. And one of the examples I like to hold up the most is I'm very good friends and have a mentor named Dave Henry. Dave was the CMO of Winn-Dixie. He was the CMO of Price Chopper. He's in his 70s. A lot of the marketers that are out there, and especially in the grocery world, Dave trained at one point or another. John and I met Dave when we were at Collective Bias, and we sat down with him. And within 5 minutes, he's like, "Oh my God, like this stuff is amazing." And he was already retired. He's like, "Man, if I was a CMO," and he's like, "Oh my God, I got to call up every CMO I know in grocery, and they're going to start working with you." And of course, he started hitting walls because, "Oh my God, oh, we don't trust. Oh, we're not sure about it. How do you measure it?" On and on. And he was totally like appalled. And I was literally witness to him dressing down a couple of these guys he trained to the point where he's like, "Look, I can't tell you guys what to do, but if I was still a CMO, I would be stopping everything and learning how to use these tools because it changes the game." Now, we're talking about 9 years ago this happened, and we're still at the point where very few grocery chains are really actively using social media or understanding it. Almost none of them are empowering their employees to create content and to share and to communicate with customers because these things take a very long time, and very often you have to wait for a generational move for when people go. But what I've learned is it's not just about generations, it's about where you are in your work life. For instance, I see a lot of millennials who I thought, "Oh my God, here it is. They grew up with this shit. They are gonna really embrace it when they get into positions of power." And what happens? They get into positions of power and they become just like every other C-level executive or VP. They say, "Oh wait, let's put on no brakes. Let's just keep everything the way it is, and we'll change the little things, and don't get me wrong. You get the occasional one out there who really takes a step forward and says, we can really make a difference. But in general, when you move into that new place where you're a higher level executive, you put on the brakes and you say, "Hey, I just want to do my job, collect my options, exercise them, and go home."
So let's bifurcate that right now. So there's the brands, and then there's thought leadership or executive leadership. How do you feel about both? So the importance of social for a brand, and then perhaps your thoughts on thought leadership as an executive, as a CMO, as a CEO, how you drive that content engine or comms engine.
I think the majority of executives, are not thought leaders because it kind of goes in opposite direction of what they think they need to do once they're an executive. Look, most executives aren't leaders, they're managers. And
Right.
there's a big difference between a leader and a manager. I mean, you can have a leader who is in your basic ranks of your company, but people follow them because they lead, because they take charge, because they step up and do things, they raise their hand. I would say the vast majority of executives are not leaders, they're managers.
Mm.
And by the way, we need managers. I'm not saying that management is not important, but the mistake we make is thinking that every manager is a leader. And that your managers or your senior executives are really your leaders. Now, great, best case scenario, senior level executives that are also leaders. But it doesn't happen that way all the time. And that's when you see the companies where you see someone taking charge at a lower level. Usually it's not much lower than VP level because it's hard to get a lot done.
Right.
But every once in a while you find a director who gets himself some air cover or herself some air cover with a couple of people above them who are going to let them run with it, not do it themselves, but give them air cover. And then they start making a difference.
Aaron, what are your thoughts here?
I think that's why you see, really innovative initiatives getting also cut down. Why you see somebody coming from, maybe coming from the ground up or the lower ranks with something super innovative and impactful, and then it either gets shut down or taken over.
There's a great story I love that Brian Solis always tells about how, earlier in the days and when he was doing a lot more of campaign type of work for companies, he gets called in by these guys and they say, Brian, we want something innovative and new and different, something that no one's ever done. And, come up with a great idea. And Brian comes back to them with a couple of great ideas. And the first question out of the mouths of the senior executives is, who else has done this? We don't want to, they asked for something new, but they didn't want to do it unless someone else had measured it, done it,
Right,
figured
exactly.
it out if it worked.
Exactly.
And, we hit that, and we hit that stuff all the time. And I think Karen made a great point is, I talk about empowering your employees, not just to create content, but to think, to allow them to come up with ideas, to let them know that no idea is a bad idea. We're just learning from this. But very often either, I would say for the most part, those ideas are quashed or they're taken over. And if they were taken over along with that person, that would be okay. But they're taken over and then the vision changes.
Mm-hmm.
And, one of the things I talk about all the time is I say, I want to start seeing brainstorming sessions where brains are actually storming because they're not there. You go into almost every company, you go into a brainstorm session and the senior guy who called it leads it, lets you know what he expects, sends you all the bullet points before you start, and everybody's brains are put on hold to just focus on what he asked them to directly focus on. And then all it does is end up, it's that echo chamber of, oh yeah, that's a great idea, let's move on.
Of expectation. So that's a good segue into something I think you wrote about is being a provocateur, right? So what does that mean? Explain it.
Well,
Ted.
I have to tell you, and the provocateur is now in my title. Like it goes on all my emails. It says author, speaker, provocateur. And it was the reason I did that is because people kept saying to me, you're so provocative. Or some people would say to me, wow, you really speak your mind. And I'm like, well, first of all, maybe you've never heard me speak. I do. Second of all, just look at my blog. People look at my blog and of course they see the URL, which is tedrubin.com. And I did that intentionally, to own my name. But my blog has a title. It's called Straight Talk. And I started that in 2009, before I was able to have the credibility I have now in the space. Well, if I do, the credibility I think I have. And it's because that's just what I've always done, and I believe in the long run that it's helped me. It certainly hindered me at some points with the wrong management or the wrong team. And certainly I've been fired or let go or moved on, or made clear it was probably a good idea if I moved on, because I will come right out and tell a senior executive, this is bullshit and it won't work.
Mm-hmm.
Or let's test it first. Why are we jumping in with both feet?
Right.
Or my favorite one. Here's my all-time favorite. And this happened again and again and again, especially with collective bias, because I was in so many boardrooms and so many agencies dealing with brands where we'd be presenting something that's targeted at a 26-year-old woman, or an 18-year-old girl, and a 45-year-old guy in the room would say, that's not going to work. We're not going to do that. I'd look around the room and say, why don't we have anybody here in the demographic we're talking to? And I don't mean Sally from Greenwich. I mean Lori from Oklahoma. And at Collective Bias, we were very fortunate. We had this community of 4,000 mom bloggers from all over the country, from all walks of life. And we had access. Like we never never did a program for a brand ever without reaching out to a community and finding people that were in the demographic we were looking at, and some outside it because we wanted their opinions too, and asking them the question, like, what do you think about this and what would work? Every single campaign we ever did for a brand to collective bias, we did with moms in that demographic.
So can you slice this for me, Ted? Because I think there's a huge disparity between when I grew up in the advertising industry and we were doing focus groups versus the power of social listening and the tools that we have today. Can you talk a little bit about that? Karen, I know that you're an expert on this. To me, this is where it's at. So the ability to tap into real-time thoughts of not just thought leaders, but consumer reactions, et cetera. Give me a little bit on that.
I think that social listening tools are a big problem. I think people rely on them because they don't really listen. They catch keywords. They catch tidbits. They're very valuable because they can lead you to the conversations you want to actually listen to. Mm-hmm. But what happens is they're accepted as the listening. Why? Make it easier, make it shorter. We got 3 bullet points. 5,000 people mention the word lemonade. Okay, there it is. Instead of actually going in and listening to the conversations and participating in them. And especially the bigger the brand is, the more people you have to do this. Again, another thing I say all the time is I'm in front of audience. I say, how many people in this room, marketers, and you're all marketers, every hand goes up, goes to the pages of the people who follow your brand and looks at what they're saying? Not one hand goes up.
None.
So I go, okay, great. How many of you guys assign people on your team every day to go to the pages? Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok. No hands go up. Well, maybe one little hand goes up. How could you not be? I mean, I spend most of my days looking at other people's content and looking at what they're saying, even now, in what's important to me, whether it's politics or it's, don't think I'm not going to places looking at the storm. There's all these guys that write up their own things and follow the storms. And John Andrews, my business partner, owns a 45-foot sailboat. So he watches these storms like crazy when they're coming up the coast of North Carolina. And he follows people that have this information. Every brand, there's so much out there. And to me, it's just plain out laziness or the ability to, if you really listen to people, then you're in a position where you kind of have to follow what they're telling you. You can't just say, that's not the way we're going to go. We're going to run with this product. We're going to do it this way. And we, again, back to the whole kind of bubble concept, just like us with friends on Facebook or anything, personally, a business gets in that bubble where they only hear what they want to hear.
So from a technology standpoint, 2 questions. One is a question for you, Ted. The second is I want to have Karen opine about this. But one, there are tools today that weren't around a year ago, that weren't around 5 years ago. I think that the point that I'm taking from you is that it really takes analysis and strategy to say, and access to leadership to convince them or educate them. So I think things have changed, in the last 5 years for sure. Definitely the last 2 years in terms of technology and platforms that are available. But Karen, what's your opinion on this?
I'm on Team Ted with this. I don't think that the tools matter. I think that if you have a very mature, sophisticated team on social, there are great tools out there and you can do a lot with them. But it only makes sense to do that if you're actually going to do something with it. And I would say, like, my favorite example is literally having corporate communications come to me and say, how can we stop people from talking about X around our product? Because it was something they don't like. And my response was, the way we can get them to stop talking about it is to fix it. That's it.
So Karen, what's scary is that they don't want, so first of all, I want to back up a second. Something you said, Michael, I think was really important. It's not just the people, and it's not, and obviously not the tools. It's the path.
Yeah.
The path has to exist for that information to flow. So I look at retailers all the time. I'm like, how come you don't talk to, how come senior executives and the social team aren't working hand in hand with the people in the stores? Because they're talking to your clients every day. They're right there on the front lines, or even the chat people. If it's Amazon, anytime I have a problem with Amazon, I get on their chat. I mean, and look, Amazon probably is doing it because they do all these things so well, but these conversations aren't happening.
No, let me just cap that off by saying that I think that at large companies, at Fortune 500 companies, there's data there's technology and there's no reason for product teams to take in that data. In other words, there's no, yeah.
There's too much data. There's too much data. They're spending money collecting it and they're not even using it. But I
Yes,
want
exactly.
Yeah.
Said in terms of direction, foundation, vision, you came up with the hashtag ROR and no let up. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I love it. It's an amazing story.
It's RONR. Return on relationship is something that I think has just been a part of my life, my whole life, before I started using the term. You know, I was taught by my dad to do for others without expectation of anything directly in return. My dad was the guy that would pull over in the street and put away people's garbage pails in neighborhoods where we didn't even know them. Our neighbors' garbage, we would end up taking out for them. And when I was old enough, he made me get out of the car and do it. And he just taught me that. And I remember as a kid, you go, but Dad, they won't even know we did it. Like, why? And he's like, it does, you know, you did it. Like, and so that was built in me. And then I had a wrestling coach who's still part of my life. You might have heard me speak about him. Him and his wife are like my second parents. They live in Pine, Arizona. And my coach always taught me the same kind of thing. Like, you know, it was his whole philosophy as a team was that it wasn't just about getting the most wins. It was about getting guys experience, getting guys an opportunity to wrestle. It wasn't fair that just the best guy always got on the mat. And therefore, we didn't have the best records in the league, but he developed people. He developed men instead of worrying about who is going to be the biggest winner. So return on relationship has just been something that I've always built relationships. Every job, every camp, every school I've ever been to, I left with at least one or two people that are still part of my circle now. And starting using the term was, again, this story with the owners of the company and what does it mean? And I looked at them and I said, return on relationship, I must have heard it somewhere because I don't think I was the first person that ever used it, but I'm certainly the person that built it and brought it brand recognition and the idea of it. I wrote the book in order to make sure to have that ownership. Just to segue quickly back now to return to no let up, you know, I guess my whole life I've been taught, like, you never let up. My coach was always like, it never ends. My coach was like, it's not just about one match or one season. It's about the next match. It's about the next season, about the next tournament. It's about the next stage of your life. I remember there was always a wise guy on every team. As I got older, that would raise his hand, usually a freshman, you know, and say, well, coach, what happens when you die? And he'd say, then your legacy lives on. So it never ends. And for me, that's just the way I've learned my whole life. We all try to get to a certain point, and then we get there and figure out that either it wasn't what we thought it was, or we need more, or another challenge happens, or a friend is ill, or there's someone in the family that needs you, or that we need time for ourselves. No let up isn't just about work. I want to give credit where credit is due for the term itself.
Yeah.
Was a buddy of mine named Tony Luisi, who I met at 1-800-Flowers in 1990. I worked there in 1999. Tony was my direct report. I was running corporate sales. Tony reported to me. Tony was a great guy. And a bunch of years later, probably when I first started using No Let Up, about 10 years ago now, I would think, Tony calls me up and says, hey, dude, I got to come over. I want to talk to you about something. I've been working on this not-for-profit. Tony was always about doing for others. His boys played ball, so he built something around baseball. And he started this thing called No Let Up. And he gave me, I have a warm-up suit, and I have a cap, and I've got, you know, I had a bracelet. And he said, I think you're really going to like this. I go, Tony, I love this, but I'm looking to take this another direction. He goes, run with it. And I said, okay, but I'm going to hashtag this, and I'm going to build something around the whole concept of no let up, you know, no let up life, no let up in business. He's like, I love it, man. That's great. And I have a blog post called So What Is No Let Up on tedrubin.com that talks about it. And, you know, every once in a while I get a call from someone going, you know, I think you stole that from my buddy, Tony Luisi. I'm like, just reach out to Tony. We're good. The only thing he asked me not to do was he had a trademark for a clothing line, like for the warm-up suits and the stuff like that. He just said to me, don't do the clothes and we're all good.
So one thing I wanted to just touch upon, because it was an experience that I had in my business dealings in Asia, and it touches upon more of a philosophical approach. The story goes, you know, no one's looking, you're at a crosswalk, It says stop. You can go. And in essence, why did the adult stop and not cross the road when he was asked at the other side? No one's looking. Why didn't you just do it? And the moral or the essence of the story is, well, if some kid was watching at the end of the day, that's going to influence him. So I think I'll articulate this better, but I think you get the gist of why we're friends, why I admire you, and your experiences and your advice. So
You know,
Ted, like, what's going on next? What's going on now with COVID? What can we expect? What kind of advice can you give? Can you? I don't know.
look, I'm very fortunate, like probably the three of us are here on this call,
Yeah.
but still facing challenges. I still have been in the same place now since March 16th. I wake up and it's like Groundhog Day. But look, I think the world is changing, and I think that any company or any person that's not preparing for that is going to be caught off guard. I'm not going to say they're wrong, because I'm not saying it's all going to change overnight. But I think that, I mean, we're never going back to the offices. I'm telling you that right now. I mean,
Yeah.
sure, I'm not saying nobody, but every major company in this country will be cutting back on offices. And office space is going to be abundant. And what does that mean? It means, on the one hand, there are going to be companies that are going to try to convince you that you have to go back to work. So I'll tell you guys, go look right now after we get off the call, go check Google, and I guarantee you're going to find a couple of articles about how this remote working isn't working.
For sure.
How people have to get back to offices. And I have a PR friend who has told me under no uncertain terms that 90% of those posts are being financed by the real estate industry.
Let me ask you this. So I think in terms of youth, so someone who, my kids, just graduated 18, 20 in school, what should they be thinking about in terms of a future?
I don't know. I
Thank you
will
for
tell
being
you
honest.
that, no, I don't know. I don't think that they necessarily have to tremendously change what they were thinking about a year ago. I
Mhm.
don't think the world has changed that dramatically. I think they might have to put some of their hopes and dreams on hold,
Right.
just because I believe that we will get to a point where this is being managed better. I don't say past it, because I don't know how past it we're going to get, but I think we'll have a vaccine at some point. I think kids, if they're 18 and 20, they've got to wrap their arms around the fact that they're not invincible, especially now, because a lot of kids feel that way. And that point I'm making is their actions affect others. And that's where the real trouble is coming in here. Look, it probably has always been this way, but I think it's being put right in front of us every single day that our actions affect others.
Right.
So that's one thing I just think they need to think about in the short term. In the long term, better themselves, learn, find things that, help them. If you want to do something crazy, do it now, because it's harder to do when you get older.
Is that
If you
about
want,
inspiration though? Or is it just maintenance?
look, at that age, before you have any obligations, do what you're passionate about.
Yeah.
Look, one of the things I hate is all the guys out there, the Garys of the world, and you got to do what you're passionate about. Quit your job, go start a business. You got to work for yourself. Fuck that, man. I got 2 kids and I got to pay bills and I'm divorced and I've got car insurance. But when you're 18 and 20, before those things happen, that's that I totally agree with Gary when he looks at young people and says, now's your time. Now, it goes back to that whole thing that we say now, I wish I knew then what I know now.
Right.
You don't. So you're probably not as skilled as you might be later on, but your ability to take on risk is a lot better. And I'm not talking about personal risk like COVID and not worrying about that. Another thing is what's happening, and with Black Lives Matter in this country. I mean,
Yeah.
I see my younger daughter putting a lot of her time into that. She is a representative at Harvard for the People's Party and about Black Lives Matter. She's this summer, instead of taking a high-paying legal job, she's working for the Women's Law Project. Now, thank goodness she can. Some people do need to make money. I get that. She doesn't right now. But I think that kids got to start seeing that we're at a critical point in our history, that this is not what it was, when we were growing up.
Right.
And now it might be, and we just didn't know it, but it's not what we all saw. Now we can clearly see this. These changes have to happen. People have to get more equality. We have to start addressing white supremacy and white fragility and the ability of people not willing to talk about it, because otherwise there's going to be an explosion one day. And what we're seeing now is not an explosion. It's mild. I mean, as we all know. But we've got to start thinking about those things. We've got to start thinking about climate change, because you and I and Karen probably will not be very greatly affected by climate change in our lifetime, but our kids definitely will.
For sure.
I mean, it's just, I would, and by the way, I'm not telling them to work for humanity and not get a job and not make money. I'm the last guy to say that, but I'm saying, like, I don't think my daughter plans on working for free when she graduates, but she's joining organizations and putting in time, extra time, and doing things that go above and beyond just what her career goals are.
So let me ask you this question, and I guess this is a roundabout way of mentioning my boys. In terms of inspiring young people, knowing what we know now, whatever their path may be, for me as a parent, it's tough. It's not easy. I fall back on, okay, we've got some time. Let's focus on education and the fundamentals and all those things. But as a parent, it's also scary for me not to know the answer, not to know the end of this and then the beginning of the next chapter. So I think you can put this in human terms, but also going back to business, it's the same type of thinking, right? So where does business development start again? How has it changed in these times? Any thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, I've said this so many times, I'm so thankful that my kids aren't young right now. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't think, I talk to friends who want to send their kids to school, and I don't think they should, but also I don't live their life and I'm not in their home, and I don't, deal with that day to day. And I'm incredibly thankful for that, because my older daughter is at Harvard Law, and it doesn't matter if it's remote or not. She's not there for the college experience. She's there to get her law degree. Whereas if it had happened to her undergrad, it would have crushed her. And I see my brother's youngest daughter, his two older ones are out of school. His youngest one is going into her sophomore year at Tufts, and she's having to deal with all this stuff, and it's difficult for him. So I first want to say that I don't totally get that, because I'm not there, but I am thankful that I'm beyond it. But again, I have friends like you who I talk to a lot, so I'm kind of in it because I'm trying to help there. As far as business, I don't think business is taking an about face. I don't think it's changing dramatically. I think what's happening is all the things that should have happened over the last 5 to 10 years are now happening rapidly. Because every company was resisting remote work. Every company was resisting using tools like Zoom. Every company, like everybody, I went to all cash in February. I wish I just put it all into Zoom. And I can't believe I didn't even think about that. But regardless, I think we just got to start thinking about different tools and different ways of getting experience. I think doors have opened for your kids. I think that a year ago, your kid would reach out to a senior executive and want to get into a Zoom with him, and the guy would have said, forget it. And now he might not do it, but he's thinking about it.
Yeah.
And I'm certainly doing it like crazy. And there are a lot of people like me that are doing that. So the opportunities, I always just say to people, you can get in touch with anybody in this new world. Just start sharing their content, especially if they're on social media, because they're going to want to know who you are if they start seeing you retweeting their tweets all the time, sharing their content, sharing their LinkedIn stuff. Sure, maybe not CEOs and CMOs because they're not doing as much, but you can find contact info to anybody. Right. And now you can actually get face-to-face with anybody, because there's nobody out there now who hasn't used this tool and hasn't gotten relatively comfortable. I mean, a year ago, I wouldn't have done this.
Who inspires you, either in the current business age or philosophically, or from books, from history? Who made TED, and, who put together TED?
Well, throughout my life, it's been all different people at different times. That book you read that inspired you back in the day, I forgot what's his name. I read the book, How to Swim with Sharks. Another one, Never Eat Alone. A lot of these things inspired me to not waste my time building connections, to not waste my time and build. So to take that time and use it effectively. People would be surprised, but I'm actually an introvert. I get very extroverted when I'm talking like this one-on-one or I'm on a stage.
Yeah.
But like, I don't like to walk into big rooms where I don't know people, but
Yeah.
I've taught myself to do it.
What about personalities in terms of either historical or public? Who's
Well,
influenced?
just back to what you were saying, inspire me. Right now, my business partner, John Andrews, inspires me. He really
Yes,
does.
I was going to ask you
You
about
know,
John. Can you tell me a bit about John?
well, I met John in 2009 when I was at Elf and he was still he was still at Walmart, and he had built something called 11 Moms, which
Mm-hmm.
was a community of mom bloggers and brands and a retailer, Walmart. And that became Collective Bias, that whole concept. He took and built Collective Bias. And I met him before he started it. He asked me to come right at the beginning, but he couldn't, I couldn't take a salary and I'm divorced. And, you know, it's hard enough to go home and tell your current wife that, you got to cut back and you don't have money, but try to tell it to your ex, it just doesn't work. But fortunately, John just kept after me and put me on his board. And then when I left Open Sky, he's like, dude, you got to come, we're ready. And then fortunately, the guy who financed the business, Ken Barnett, was very anxious to have me on board and made me a great deal and made me a partner, which is what set me up, you know. But there's so many things I love about John. John's a thought leader. John's ideas are just always springing out of his head. John and I just match because I throw out content. Him and I have these talks. We'll come up with something, and there's never a question. Go take it's yours.
Yep.
Like I take all that stuff. I share all that stuff. I come up with those one-liners. I'm the one that gets them some kind of traction because that's what I do. But John loves retail. He loves people. He's a way nicer guy than I am. And I mean that in the respect that I do a lot for people I care about and people in general. But John's that guy that talks to everybody. Like the bum, the guy who's homeless, who's sitting on the corner, ends up at our table in an outdoor restaurant. John is great now because we're in this crazy time and both of us are relatively political, if not very political. And John, like me, because I don't take this shit personally. I might kind of internalize it, but I rarely will fight with someone online. I'll say, okay, I got it. Thanks for your opinion, or I'm ready to move on, or I'll even say, look, I'm done, because I don't want it to get ugly. John's great with that.
Kind of like a soul partner, like me and Karen.
Yes, I call John my business soulmate.
Yeah, there you go.
And I'm so fortunate to have him in my life. He's also, I've never said this publicly, and it was something I've been meaning to tell John, so maybe he'll watch it. But, I'm very lucky. I have a lot of friends, and my daughters used to say to me, Daddy, how do you have so many friends? Like, I look at them very honestly, and I'd always say, girls, it's not because I'm the nicest guy in the world. It's because I work hard at it. And by the way, that hurts you sometimes. I put a lot of effort into some people who end up saying they're not interested, or they don't follow up. But again, I've learned to do for people, regardless of what they give back. I don't drop friends because they don't live up to my expectations. I move them into a different category. And I also told my girls, there are acquaintances, there are friends, there are work friends, there are great friends, there are lifelong friends, and then there's those people who are just like family. And I'm lucky, I have 5 of those. I have this inner group. But out of all of them, and I love them all, and I travel with them and I spend time with them, but John is the only one that I can sit for weeks at a time in a room and we don't have to say anything to each other. We'll just look at each other and go, got it. Or he'll tweet something, he'll go, check my Twitter.
That's a gift, dude. That's a gift.
And I'll take it and run with it. So yes, I think you kind of have that with Karen. I'm lucky that I'm in business with John. And hey, I'm in Photify because just like John, he's like, by the way, I just joined as CEO and I have to tell you this, there's no money in it, but you're CMO. As far as people, my dad and my mom, and also my wrestling coach has been huge in my life. Ira Guy Bell. I was lucky. I was a wrestler back when coaches could have you in their basement wrestling and there was no problems and nobody got worried about it. You could eat dinner at their house, become part of their family, put a diaper on their kid. Both their sons, I was around when they were born. They were part of my life, and he has been a lifelong mentor of mine. So
Ted,
now,
can you give me some background on your parents, where they came from, where you grew up?
Sure. So really interesting story. My grandparents were all from Poland. Poland, and some of them were bordered on Russia, so there's a little question about whether there's any Russian blood in there. My grandparents escaped Poland at the beginning of the Holocaust. My grandfather spent most of the war raising money to sneak Jews out of Poland. My mother's my father's father died at the age of 47. Stay with me here.
Yeah.
My mother's mother died at the age of 54. And my father's mother married my mother's father.
I got to think about that. Hold on.
Before I was old enough to know, I had one set of grandparents. They were one from each side, and they were married.
Huh.
So I grew up in an incredibly loving family in the respect that they were never the who do we go to, which side do we go. I had cousins who used to come to Passover only one night because they had to go to their other grandparents another night. When I was really young and in elementary school, I remember thinking kids were lying to me because they tell me about all these presents they got for Hanukkah or Christmas from this grandparent and that grandparent. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I thought parents married each other, brothers and sisters because of this thing. But they were from Poland. They brought over a real, mindset of what they lived through there, again, escaping during the Holocaust, living here through the war. My parents were first generation. They grew up in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
My dad went to World War II. He met my mom right before he went. She was 16, he was 18. He would write her postcards, and my grandmother had to write to him to tell him to stop writing postcards because the postman is reading them to her.
Jesus.
And my dad's father died young. So he was the oldest brother. His two brothers were 5 years younger and 15 years younger. So he had to, I always thought that he went to work in the Catskills at 16 because it was a summer job. I did not find this out till he passed. And my uncle told me the story that my father graduated high school early because there was no room left for him in the house. And he needed to send money home. So he graduated at 16, went up to the Catskills and worked. And my dad was what you call a hustler. And I mean that in the good way, not my dad worked in the Catskills, had a side job, earning a little bit of money, washed some cars, did whatever he could do to help family get by.
Right.
So that's my dad. My mom grew up with an Orthodox Jewish father. So she always thought of herself as a second-class citizen. This is back, this is back in the 30s and 40s and 50s. And my mom was supposed to go to college. My mother was very smart, very bright, very accomplished in school, was supposed to go away to college. And my father gave the money to a distant cousin who couldn't afford to go away to college. And she ended up at Brooklyn College, which was home. It was something she carried with her entire life. It was something that caused a rift between her and her. She loved her father. She was a dutiful daughter, but there was always that thing that he gave her. And that's why my brothers and I all got to go my parents didn't have a lot of money, but we were going to college, and we were going to whatever college we chose. My older brother went to Harvard. I went to Cornell. My younger brother went to Tulane. These were all full price, not state schools. We all did very well in school, and my mother felt that this was something that she couldn't let us not have the way it was taken away from her.
So let me go back to this, Ted. When we talked about, my 18 and 20-year-olds, your daughters, and the outlook of what's ahead of us, what I think about are the stories that I heard from my father, who came as an immigrant from Malta, my mother's side, Irish, Portuguese, etc. Different mindset back then, right? Who brought you, Ted Rubin, to be who you are in the United States is a different type of person than what I see as today's youth.
100%. I mean, my grandparents were very different than any of us than our kids have as grandparents, or that we will be as grandparents. It's a different world. It was back then. It was more about you get your education. You have to get a college degree. You get a job. Again, I was brought up by a dad that hustled, so he taught me to hustle. And I remember at one point when I was going through a hard time, and I said to my parents, I'll always make, you don't have to worry about me. I will always make a living. And understand my trajectory was not this. I mean, damn, I've been broke. I lost a couple of businesses. But it's a different world. Opportunities are different. We have the ability to reach out and do almost anything. The thing my dad used to try to make me do of write a letter to this guy, and if you write enough of them, maybe someone will open it. It would take me weeks. Now we can do it in the click of a button.
Yeah.
So, look, there's positives and negatives. I don't think it's all good. We lived in a simpler time. I mean, I'm older than you. I'm 62. And I grew up, we went outside and played every night after dinner.
Right.
And we played kickball, and we had and the worst fights where my older brother had to moderate it. There was never, when I was in, from sixth grade on, I would leave the house every day on a weekend and just get on my bike and go. But I gave my daughters a lot of leeway. I let them, I lived in a nice town. I let them walk to town. I get calls from other mothers saying, "What the hell are you doing? You let the girls walk to town." I'm like, it's a half a mile. They all have iPhones.
Two things, just to wrap up, because I know we're out of time. Any shout outs, Ted, for books, links, at mentions, that sort of thing. And then Karen, just to kind of round it off with any type of.
I've been doing a lot of reading. I've been taking advantage of this time, not having to travel, not being back and forth, not all the time. I used to have to book my travel, and I've been reading a lot. So I've got a lot of books. I mean, I highly recommend White Fragility.
Yeah.
It's a great book. I'm also where's the next one? So these are two books I'm reading right now. This one I'm reading right now. And don't let the title fool you, because it's not really what, like, I've had a few people see this and get annoyed. It's about class in America. It's not a book about white trash. It's a book about how white trash has been created. They're really just a phenomenon that has been created by class structure.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so we just put people in that group. And this book goes back into great history about when this country was founded, things that we were never really taught. So
who wrote it?
It's written by Nancy Eisenberg, Isenberg. I'll send you a list of these.
Cool.
This is also another great book that is on my list, Me and White Supremacy, which talks a lot about what's happening. I mean, I've got so many. I just read a book called Switch, which is a great book for business and for personal life. It's about how to change the minds of people.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how do we get people to change their direction and change their mind? And it was written back in 2009. And it's just a great book. And it's really valuable if you work at a company like Western Union, or you work at even the smaller places, about how to get people on board and how to talk to them differently, and how it's all about the elephant inside us, which is our emotions. It's about data and our stats, which is our brain, and then it's about the path. And very often it can be all three. It can be just one that we have to change. Give people the path; they'll take it. Don't show them the way, and they might never figure it out. And take the brain and try to move the elephant. Good luck, unless you get the emotions involved. So that's a great book. I've got so many more. I'll send you a list. Maybe you can include it in whatever you post.
No, that'd be awesome. And I think there's some follow-up conversations in terms of path building. So I think that we covered everything that I wanted to cover and explored some new ideas, but you gave me some new ideas that I want to think about, and possibly come back to you if you're open to it.
I'm open anytime. The real challenge to doing these things for me before was being in a place I could do it.
Yeah.
You're on the road, you're in other places, you need a room, is the Wi-Fi working? I'm here all the time. So certainly I'm busy, but I can do this anytime. This is my living room. And maybe next time, because I talked way too much this time, maybe we can get Karen jumping in a little bit more.
No, and we're in the same space. So the reason I jumped off the screen is because my dog was snoring, and I tried to poke her, and then I lost my connection, and that's how life is these days. So
that's okay. I got to get back and finish the hurricane prep, because the storm could hit here tomorrow morning. So I got to be ready.
Ted, thank you for your time. You're brilliant. You're lovely. You're beautiful. I'm going to follow up with you.
I'm happy to do this with you guys anytime. And also, if you ever just want to jump on a call, just ring anytime.
Thank you.
Okay, guys.
Take care.
Thank you so much today for listening to RDB's podcast. If you enjoyed the conversation, please consider leaving us a rating and a review. Also, be sure to subscribe to the podcast and follow us on Instagram at RDB.agency and on Twitter at RDB.agency. Thank you once again for listening. We'll see you next time.